Good afternoon. I am John Gore, the Acting Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division here at the Department of Justice. And on behalf of the entire department, I welcome you to our commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. Please stand as you are able for the presentation of the colors by the Joint Armed Forces Color Guard. The national anthem will be performed by the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. Please be seated. Thank you to the Joint Armed Forces Color Guard and the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. Not sure how we're going to compete with that this afternoon, but we'll try. We are honored to have you, our several esteemed speakers, and other dignitaries, community leaders, and important partners with us here today to commemorate the landmark Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act protects one of the most basic and fundamental of all civil rights. It protects everyone who purchases or rents a home from discrimination because of their race, color, national origin, or religion, and later, after amendments to the Act, because of their sex, disability, or familial status. This week's 50th anniversary comes on the heels of another 50th anniversary we marked just last week. Last Wednesday, April 4th, was the 50th anniversary of the tragic and untimely assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Dr. King was one of the most important and iconic figures in American history. His towering leadership changed the country for the better, and his legacy continues to unite, uplift, and inspire countless millions all across the globe. In 1966, 2 years before Dr. King's assassination, Dr. King launched a campaign for fair housing, marching through Chicago to advocate against segregation. To illustrate the substandard and deplorable conditions that many African Americans faced in their housing, Dr. King and his family moved into a tenement in a rundown Chicago neighborhood with dirt floors and broken doors. Dr. King took his campaign nationwide, joining with President Lyndon Johnson to call upon the Congress to enact what would become the Fair Housing Act. Sadly, Dr. King did not live to see his goal of nationwide fair housing legislation become a reality. But even in death, Dr. King continued to inspire action. The Civil Rights Act of 1968, which included the Fair Housing Act, passed the Senate on the day of his death, but was expected to face difficulty in the House of Representatives. President Johnson called upon the House to enact the law in tribute and honor to Dr. King. The House quickly did so, and President Johnson signed the act into law on April 11, 1968, 1 week after Dr. King's passing. The Fair Housing Act continues to stand as a tribute to Dr. King, who gave his life for fairness and equality. Today we commemorate the enormous progress our country has made under the Fair Housing Act over the last 5 decades. The Fair Housing Act has fundamentally transformed America. In many places, it has replaced segregation with integration. It's replaced despair with hope and poverty with prosperity. It's lifted millions out of the depths of intergenerational struggle. And it's advanced the fundamental premise of the American dream, that all Americans are entitled to full and equal access to good housing, good neighborhoods, good schools, and good jobs. Since the passage of the Act, the Civil Rights Division and the Department of Justice have been at the forefront of enforcing its protections and vindicating the rights of people all across the country. The department and its partners, most notably the Department of Housing and Urban Development, have led the way in eradicating the vestiges of a time when people were told where they could and could not live because of who they were, what they believed, or where they were from. At the same time, today we recognize that there is still much work to be done to fulfill the universal promise of the Act and to break down the barriers that continue to discriminate against too many people in our country. Discrimination in housing is especially pernicious because it robs its victims of their fundamental rights and dignity. And its impact extends far beyond the 4 walls of the home. As President Reagan remarked in 1988 when he signed the amendments to the Act, discrimination is particularly tragic when it means that a family is denied housing that is close to good schools, a good job, or simply in a better neighborhood to raise children. We are honored today to be joined by our Attorney General, who has committed to continuing our strong effort to enforce the Fair Housing Act. Since January of 2017, the department has filed more than 15 Fair Housing Act cases, and we have resolved, either through settlement or favorable judgment, 33 civil actions upholding fair housing rights from Washington State to Kansas to Mississippi. Just last month, the department entered into a settlement agreement with 2 St. Louis landlords who had been accused of sexually harassing 15 female tenants. Over the course of 20 years, these landlords required women to perform sexual acts in exchange for housing and housing benefits and retaliated against women who denied their advances. The settlement agreement provides $625,000 in relief to these victims, and it puts in place procedures to guarantee that these landlords can never again engage in sexual harassment. In addition to the civil protections, the Fair Housing Act also outlaws hate crimes that deny the basic right to fair housing. Hate crimes are a form of violent crime. They intimidate victims, their families, and entire communities. Combating hate crimes is and will remain a top priority of the Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division. Just 3 weeks ago, we obtained a conviction against a man in a housing-related hate crime. The man accosted a 7-year-old African-American boy in the common area of their apartment complex. He shouted at the boy to leave and yelled racial slurs at him. When the boy's father came outside to see what was happening, the man drew a stun cane and tased him in the neck. As the father fell to the ground in pain, the son screamed and called out to him. Eventually, the father recovered enough strength to pull his son back inside the apartment while the man continued to yell and scream racial slurs at them and tell them to move out because of their race. The United States will not stand by while criminals use violence and intimidation to deny fair housing rights. We will continue to zealously and aggressively prosecute egregious crimes like these that deprive Americans of a safe place to live. As these cases demonstrate, sadly, discrimination in housing is not a thing of the past. There remain many important fronts in the fight for fair housing. One of those important fronts is the fight against an invidious and sometimes violent form of discrimination, sexual harassment. Too many landlords and others in position of authority abuse their power over people's housing to prey on vulnerable victims, most often women. They seek to invade the safety and sanctity of their victims' homes. They seek to force their victims to choose between having sex and having a home. This is completely unacceptable. Sexual harassment in housing is illegal, and the Department of Justice is firmly committed to eradicating it from our communities and our country. Since January of 2017, the department has filed or settled 9 sexual harassment in housing cases and recovered more than $1.6 million in relief for victims. Yet many victims do not know that sexual harassment in housing is illegal, and they don't know that the Justice Department can do something about it. And that is why in the fall of last year, we launched the Sexual Harassment in Housing Initiative. That initiative is raising awareness and increasing reporting through building local partnerships in communities and magnifying public outreach all across the country. Today, the Attorney General will be making some exciting announcements about expanding that initiative nationwide. We at the Department of Justice could not be successful in our efforts to enforce the Fair Housing Act without our fantastic partners, particularly our partners at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Much of our most important work stems from HUD's diligent investigation of complaints it receives. We're honored today to be joined by Secretary Ben Carson and Assistant Secretary Ana Maria Farias, both of whom are strong allies and partners in the fight for fair housing. We will also be joined later today by Secretary Alexander Acosta of the Department of Labor. Secretary Acosta has a long history of vindicating civil rights, including fair housing. From 2003 to 2005, he served as the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights here at the Department of Justice. When we first reached out to Secretary Acosta and invited him to be here today, he unfortunately had a conflicting event. But he insisted on coming anyway, so much so that he's going to rush over here and join us in the middle of our program as soon as he is available. I'd also like to recognize Acting Associate Attorney General Jesse Pinoccio, who is a strong supporter of the Civil Rights Division and of the initiative. Unfortunately, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has been called away on another matter today, so Mr. Pinoccio will have the honor of introducing the Attorney General later in our program. We have many distinguished guests here in the audience today, Archivist David Ferraro among them. But I'd be up here all afternoon if I were going to name all of you. But let me just throw out 3 that I think are very important. Stephen Pollack, Ralph Boyd, and Tom Wheeler, all of whom are former Assistant Attorneys General or Acting Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division. And finally, I'd like to thank the hardworking career professionals of the Civil Rights Division, the attorneys, the investigators, the paralegals, and the support staff, particularly those in the housing and civil enforcement and criminal sections who work tirelessly day in and day out to fight for fair housing. Their dedication is what makes it possible for the division to uphold the Fair Housing Act. And with that, I'd like to turn the stage over to Housing and Urban Development Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, the Honorable Ana Maria Farias. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ana Maria Farias, and I'm HUD's Assistant Secretary of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here on this 12th day of Fair Housing Month. And if you had told me many, many decades ago that I would be here, being the daughter of a maid, growing up in the housing projects, not speaking the language, and having to go to a migrant school because I could not go to the regular elementary school, I'm glad that you mentioned the bill, because Crystal City is only 18 miles from Cotulla, Texas, and that is where LBJ, as we Texans have a tendency of calling, LBJ Johnson was responsible for the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights, and the Fair Housing. He oftentimes would talk about his experience as a teacher, teaching little Mexican kids in a one-room wooden school in dirt floors, similar to the one that I went to, just 18 miles away, because no one wanted to teach them, and no one thought they should be taught. But he did, and I was very glad I only lived 18 miles away. So we have always been grateful to LBJ, a very good Texan. Yesterday over at HUD, we held our formal program celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act and its historic role advancing equality in housing. Indeed, our nation has made great progress, but is much more to be made. As we discussed earlier in a panel dealing with sexual harassment, my mother almost became a victim when I was 11, but she fought it. And she also made sure that I was protected. But I also realized that many other mothers do not fight it, nor can they protect their children. And so when someone asks today, has this become the new priority? And my attitude was, it should have been a priority over 50 years ago. And it should not be a priority just for a little bit of time. It should be for the remainder of our lifetimes. That's why I feel so honored when I introduced the speaker, because when I told him the cases I had and that I was going to take a very strong stance in my experience, and that I just finished reading a case about the testimony of 8- and 9-year-olds having to talk about how a maintenance director who with a key, a master key, got into their home and mommy had to fight him off. And I said, sir, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to be making very strong statements. He's a very quiet man and a very honorable. And he just looked at me and listened. And he says, you know, my mother used to fight that way. And she always used to protect us kids. So, Miss Assistant Secretary, you throw the book at them. And I said, absolutely, sir, I plan to, Texas style. LBJ would have been very proud of me, and so is Catula. Secretary Carson knows what it's like to be denied access to decent rental housing. He's familiar with the cycle of poverty, as I was and many others have been, that can fester when families are concentrated in neighborhoods lacking good schools and good job opportunities. And he's demonstrated to me over and over again his unwavering commitment to ensure that HUD continues to work with the Justice Department. And I'm so glad that we have finally arrived after all these years, 50 years of fair housing, and we're just now getting here to deal with sexual harassment. So that you can protect the right of every American to live where they choose, and especially women, because those were the only cases that I've heard. I have not yet had a man that has been sexually harassed, but if they are, they too will be protected. It is not enough for housing to just give you the opportunity of a good, decent, affordable home. A woman or a man should not feel that they have to sell their soul to remain in that home. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great privilege to ask you to join me in welcoming our HUD Secretary, the Honorable Ben Carson.
I'll get that out of the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much. John, I appreciate everything that you do and that wonderful story that you told. And to Attorney General Sessions, thank you for putting this program together, having me here, and the wonderful things that we've been able to work on together, and your entire staff. It gives me great encouragement to see these things being pursued correctly. You know, 50 years ago, we found our nation in turmoil. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dealt a devastating blow to the civil rights movement and the promise of America for all of its citizens. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I remember so vividly that day at Southwestern High School in inner city Detroit when the announcement was made about Dr. King's assassination, and the shock and the violence, and people were breaking windows, breaking down doors, and just beating up people who didn't look like them. It was awful. But I also remember the hope just 1 week later when President Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act into law. It had been languishing and just could not get a vote until the impetus and the emotional energy that was supplied, unfortunately, by that tragedy drove it across the finish line. Today we celebrate our fidelity to Dr. King's vision and recommit ourselves to preserving his view from the mountaintop. When President Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act into law on April the 11th, 1968, he declared, "The voice of justice speaks again. Fair housing for all human beings who live in this country is now a part of the American way of life." And at that time, it was a difficult way of life. I remember we lived right on the edge of the black and white communities in the area of Detroit called Delray. And we had to walk through the white neighborhood on the way to school, and the looks of disdain and hatred you'll never forget. And I remember one day, my junior high was also an all-white junior high. A group of young white men surrounded me with sticks. One hit me very hard across the back, and they said, "You need to leave this school, and if you ever come back, we're going to kill you." So that kind of thing didn't just happen in the South. It happened in Detroit as well. And I'll never remember in the 8th grade, I was vying for the top academic honors. And you had to take a report card around to each teacher, and they would put your grade on it. And I had all A's, and it was looking pretty good. I was going to get the award. My last class was band. I was very good in band. In fact, I was offered a scholarship to Interlochen, the International Music Camp. But the band teacher gave me a C to ruin my report card and my chances. However, to his chagrin, they didn't count band. So, so I still got the award. And interestingly enough, one of the teachers got up in front of the assembly and chastised all the white kids and said, "You should be ashamed of yourself. How could you allow a black boy to outperform all of you academically?" But you know what that really demonstrates? Ignorance, which is the cause of prejudice, ignorance and fear. And then when those two cases don't cover it, just plain evil. As we announce an expansion of the current initiatives between HUD and DOJ on sexual harassment this afternoon, we commit our agencies to leading a necessary discussion about an issue that is plaguing our society. And, through our FHEO department, we deal not only with sexual harassment, but obviously with racial prejudice, with disabilities, with family status, with a whole host of injustices that occur in our society on a daily basis. It is again about fairness. Some people have forgotten the meaning of that word. It covers a lot of things. And again, it's about equality. and again about the application of justice. All discrimination stains the very fabric of our nation. But HUD is especially focused on protecting the right of everyone to feel safe and secure in their homes, free from unwanted sexual harassment. No person should have to tolerate unwanted sexual advances in order to keep a roof over his or her head. Part of our mission at HUD is to provide safe housing, and we will remain diligent to this message to protect those we serve. I look forward to working with Attorney General Sessions and the Department of Justice as part of our joint effort to bring an end to this type of discrimination. In May, HUD will begin a national sexual harassment training initiative with our public housing authorities and other subsidized housing providers. Working with our grantees, HUD will ensure that housing providers understand and embrace their obligations under the Fair Housing Act to protect residents from all forms of sexual harassment and to swiftly enforce the law against bad actors. And this is not a new problem. Obviously, it's been around for a long time, and it's time for us to do something about it. You know, my mother, I remember, was once harassed sexually by a man. And you should have seen that man when she got done with him. But my mother was one who really didn't lay down for anybody. But not all people can protect themselves the way that my mother did. And we are committed to rooting sexual harassment out of subsidized and public housing once and for all. We'll continue to carry the faith of Dr. King with us and continue to struggle nonviolently on the high plane of dignity and discipline, as Dr. King vowed, until every citizen has been granted the full riches of freedom and the security of justice. At the Lorraine Hotel, where I just visited in Memphis 2 days ago, on April the 4th, 1968, nearing 6 p.m., Dr. King spotted well-known saxophonist Benny Branch in the parking lot and made one last request. He leaned over the balcony and asked the musician to play his favorite song that night, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." Moments later, our country would never be the same. But our nation heard his message. America heard his call to action, and we continue to march for justice. And what was that message? That message is that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. We must not allow ourselves to be manipulated into thinking that we're enemies. We must not get into our respective corners and hurl hand grenades at each other and teach our children to hate, and have on our college campuses tolerance taught to people who agree with you only. This is not what America was about. It's not as what Dr. King was about. We need to reject division and hatred. It can only lead to destroying ourselves, and we must embrace godly principles of loving your fellow man, caring about your neighbor, developing your God-given talents to the utmost so that you become valuable to the people around you, having values and principles that govern your life. And if we do that, we will truly have one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Carson, for your inspiring life story, your inspiring leadership, and your inspiring remarks today. In 2013, the National Fair Housing Alliance set out to help people appreciate the story behind the Fair Housing Act. They produced a short documentary that gives context to the moment we have come together to commemorate today. They've graciously allowed us to present this video for you today, so I now ask that you direct your attention to the screen for this documentary titled 7 Days.
Few in the nation believe that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip.
Ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The death of the prophet of nonviolence set off the worst outbreak of arson, looting, and criminal activity in the nation's history. Washington's ghettos burned within a few blocks of the nation's capital.
The life of a man who symbolized the freedom and faith of America has been taken. And no words of mine can fill the void of the eloquent voice that has been stilled. But this I do believe deeply. The dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has not died with him.
President Johnson was willing to speak up and say, we have to pass a fair housing bill.
Hello, Mr. President? Yes, Dick. We're in trouble. We need some help. Yes? I'm afraid of that.
Federal troops, for the first time since the Civil War, took up positions to guard government buildings.
Nothing's probably touchier than your own neighborhood and your own home or your own apartment. The administration, which supported the bill, said this has no chance. The other stuff is okay, but this will kill any politician that touches it.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed. But I moved here because it was a white community. I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And if there's too many colored people around here, I definitely will get out. I think that, well, the property values will immediately go down if they're allowed to move in here in any number.
It seems as though our country is pulling apart into separate societies, where whites have jobs and Negroes have unemployment, where the middle class lives in suburbs and the poor are left in the ghettos, where one group of Americans looks upon another group of Americans with growing mistrust and even dread.
Then the bill went over into the House Rules Committee, and under the chairmanship of the famous Judge Smith, a right-wing segregationist from Virginia, he wouldn't hold hearings on it. He would take the bill home so nobody could act on it, and we were running out of time.
Thousands flowed through the rainy streets of Memphis this day, finishing a march that Dr. King planned to lead in support of striking garbage workers.
How many men must die before we can really have a free and true and peaceful peaceful society.
Of your presence, Lord. And I know you'll reach out and take mine. You'll take our hand.
The death of Martin Luther King is a tragic thing, but no legislation should be passed as a memorial to anyone.
In spite of the riots, I am going to support this legislation with all the vigor that I possess.
The laws that we pass up here are for all time. The Martin Luther Kings come and go.
The public reaction to this horror gave the sensible members of the committee a compelling argument that the House Rules Committee had to report that bill out. And I think that's how we got our bill. They just didn't dare bottle it up any longer.
I have a dream that one day Negroes will be able to buy a house anywhere that their money will carry them.
At long last this afternoon, fair housing for all is now a part of the American way of life. Democracy's work is being done, and the bell of freedom rings out a little louder. We have come some of the way, not near all of it.
Fight still goes on because we unfortunately have the laws, but we don't have the enforcement. And we have changed, but we still have the same kinds of discrimination.
The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights said today that efforts by federal agencies to end housing discrimination have been generally superficial or incomplete.
President Carter has ordered federal agencies to use all means possible to strengthen fair housing programs.
For the first time, people with disabilities and families with children will be protected from housing discrimination.
President Reagan signed legislation today designed to toughen up the nation's fair housing laws.
Why did you take part in this demonstration today? Just because there was a huge crowd, or did you have any personal reason?
Well, I took part in this march today because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for, because this march is what he died for.
You know what he stood for?
Yes. He stood for nonviolence and peace for all men of all kinds. And I think if he died for it, I could carry out what he started.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. As you've heard, Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein sends his regrets he could not be here today. I'm Jesse Pinoccio, the Acting Associate Attorney General. I want to thank Secretary Acosta, who was able to join us while the documentary was going. It's a real pleasure to be here today to recognize the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. We are grateful to the National Fair Housing Alliance for producing that very powerful documentary, and also to the Civil Rights Division for organizing today's event. I also want to thank Secretary Carson and Secretary Acosta and Assistant Secretary Farias for joining us at the Department of Justice to mark this milestone. As we saw in the documentary, the Fair Housing Act was born from tremendous tragedy. the shocking assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a messenger of equality and of America's promise. Dr. King famously said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. By protecting people from discrimination in housing, the Act stands as one fitting legacy of Dr. King's ability to spread justice everywhere across America. Regardless of race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, or national origin, every American has an equal right to be free from discrimination when deciding where to live. For 50 years, the Department of Justice has vigorously litigated cases involving Fair Housing Act violations throughout the country. That effort continues under the leadership of Attorney General Jeff Sessions. During his tenure, our department has achieved a successful outcome in more than 30 fair housing civil cases. Additional cases are now in litigation and others are under investigation. We are grateful to the many department attorneys who make this important mission their daily work. The Attorney General also vigorously supports efforts to combat sexual harassment in housing. Under his and Acting Assistant Attorney General John Gore's leadership, the department, along with HUD, has launched an ambitious initiative to ensure that no person is forced to choose between being sexually harassed and having the most basic necessity of life, a place to live. Avoiding discrimination in housing is right and it is just, and because of the Fair Housing Act, it is the law of the land. Attorney General Sessions' commitment to Fair Housing Act enforcement is consistent with the overriding goal of his tenure: full and fair application of the rule of law. We are fortunate to have an Attorney General who has spent a lifetime as an advocate for the rule of law and who deeply cares for this department and its people. You can be confident that under the leadership of Jeff Sessions, the Department of Justice will fully and fairly enforce the Fair Housing Act and oppose unlawful discrimination of any kind. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to the 84th Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions.
Thank you very much, Jesse, and your leadership as a number 3 person in this department, and thank you for your kind remarks. I want to thank John Gore. Did a fabulous job on those remarks, John, and you're doing a great job at the Civil Rights Division. I'm proud of the work that this entire division does to fight discrimination in housing and in so many other areas. You and your team are doing great work, and we appreciate it. I want to welcome and say thanks to my good friend, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Dr. Ben Carson. Ben, you're a man of faith and committed to public service, man of integrity, such a fabulously even disposition, but a relentless advocate for truth and justice. And your leadership and commitment to safety and security in housing is appreciated. That agenda goes hand in hand with our law and order agenda. Thank you for being here with us to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act and to renew our commitment, full commitment, to its provisions and to discuss our next steps in fighting sexual harassment in housing. Welcome back to one of John Gore's predecessors, our Secretary of Labor, Alex Acosta. Alex, good to see you again. It was just a week or so ago that he was here to speak to the new group of United States attorneys. In addition to being AAG for civil rights, he was a United States attorney, and he did a great job of sharing some thoughts with that group. He's also been a friend and a partner in many of the things that we're trying to achieve today. I'd like to note that we have a number of esteemed guests in the audience as well, and I want to welcome back to the department former civil rights AAGs Ralph Boyd, Tom Wheeler, and Stephen Pollock. Stephen Pollock, who helped negotiate the Fair Housing Act. Thank you, Judge Levy, Assistant Secretary for RIAS, Reed Colfax, Bill Nolan, for sharing your experiences and insights with us this morning on our panel discussion on the 7th floor earlier. This government is resolutely committed to ending discrimination in housing. We're prepared to defend the full strength of this act, and we're going to take whatever action is required. We must always remember that when the Fair Housing Act passed, brutal discrimination was rampant in this country. I remember those days. Ben's too young. He doesn't remember those days. But I remember those days, and I saw it, and we know it was wrong. And this bill was a historic act, really historic, in making some big changes in our country. When the act passed, thousands of African American veterans were returning home from serving their country in Vietnam, only to find themselves excluded from neighborhoods in their own hometowns. It was indeed a national disgrace. And this is no small matter. For many Americans, owning a home is a key step toward economic mobility and financial security, and for many it's their largest asset, one that returns benefits to them for the rest of their lives. And as we saw in this video, which was the way it was, passing this act was difficult. It took years of work, but in the wake of Dr. King's assassination, an awakened Congress took action and passed the legislation. Stephen Pollock, where's Stephen? You here? I would just say I'm sure that was an amazing time for him to go from disappointment and frustration to success. Do I have there? Under the circumstances of Dr. King's assassination. The Fair Housing Act gave the Department of Justice and HUD powerful new tools that have helped create an engine for transformation. Since 1968, the department has filed 1,500 fair housing cases, including some very large ones that impacted entire cities and resulted in historic elimination of many discriminatory practices. And since 1968, Congress has expanded the scope of the Fair Housing Act to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex, handicap, and parenthood. Congress has also expanded the powers of the FHA. They've given the Department of Justice the ability, indeed the duty, to win not only injunctions but financial relief for victims. We've been fulfilling that duty across the country. Recently, a mixed-race couple in Port Richey, Florida, woke up to a burning cross on their front lawn. The couple had just moved to the neighborhood and had been met already with racial slurs and even physical assault. Thanks to the FHA, in August, we put 3 men responsible, those 3, right where they belong, in the slammer. And I appreciate the team that worked on that case. And there was a Muslim family in Tampa that was looking to buy a house. And they were touring one home that they liked. A man walked in and said they weren't welcome and that he was going to burn the house down. As a result, they could not and did not move in. A little more than a month ago, that man pled guilty to a hate crime. Bill Nolan prosecuted both of those cases. Great job, Bill. Where's Bill? Here we say. We appreciate that great work. There have been many other cases where the FHA has empowered us to achieve justice for victims of discrimination. Of course, the clarity of the law and its moral authority has also transformed housing patterns across America, where many changes occurred without litigation, maybe an awareness of the new standards the Act set and made the communities better. We certainly have a long way to go, but a lot of things have changed. One thing that is not fully appreciated is that the Fair Housing Act empowers the department to go after landlords, property managers, maintenance workers, and others who engage in patterns of sexual harassment against their tenants. This is indeed a serious problem. We've seen many cases, especially in public housing, where a landlord will exploit vulnerable women and threaten them with eviction unless they provide sexual favors. We are not going to tolerate that. So we've begun a new initiative to combat the problem. In the last 6 months alone, you heard about one case where over $600,000 in damages were won. We have made a number of cases involving 15 victims, and we're going to continue to get more judgments in the future. Just yesterday, we filed a civil rights case against a landlord in New York for an alleged pattern of pressuring his tenants into sexual favors and subjecting them to unwelcome touching and comments. We have good reason to believe that sexual harassment in housing is vastly underreported. Prosecutors who've worked on these cases tell us that when they find one victim, they tend to find many more as well. That's why today I'm announcing 3 steps for the initiative that will make us more effective. First, we're beginning a new task force with our partners, with Dr. Carson at HUD, that will focus on sharing information about the complaints we've received, improving training for public housing authorities, and working together to raise awareness on how we can help. Too many victims in these situations don't realize that our departments can help them. Which brings me to a second announcement. Together with our partners at HUD, we are launching a new awareness campaign about sexual harassment in housing. We'll issue public service announcements and social media materials concerning survivors and asking those survivors to come forward to speak to law enforcement. On that note, I want to thank President Trump for declaring April 2018 as National Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. The proclamation says that this administration is, quote, committed to raising awareness about sexual assault and empowering victims to identify perpetrators so they can be held accountable. We must make it as easy as possible for those who've suffered from sexual assault to alert authorities, close quote. That's what our new awareness campaign is all about. I hope that all of you will help us spread the word. Third and finally, we will distribute new training materials to all 94 of our United States Attorney's offices on enforcement and outreach matters. Outreach to our public housing community. We believe that will make us more effective, that will encourage better reporting, and will help us bring more cases and put more predators behind bars. But our goal is greater than just prosecution. Our goal is to end this illegality and unacceptable behavior. The people who seek help from HUD and in private housing must never be subjected to sexual harassment. And of course, there's a lot more for us to do. Our team is ready to do more, John. I know you are. The FHA and its implementation have changed over the years, but the basic principle remains the same. In the United States of America, no one should be improperly subjected to discrimination, overt or covert, in their choice of housing. It's unacceptable. It will not be allowed. We will not retreat from all the great protections that are set forth in the Fair Housing Act, but we're going to focus this year on this special and new initiative. So I want to thank all of you for doing your part, particularly our Civil Rights Division team and our Fair Housing team for the great work that you do, and we continue to work hard to support you in those great efforts. Thank you all.
Thank you, Attorney General Sessions, for your principled and outstanding leadership to the department, your continued support of the Civil Rights Division, and your powerful remarks. Now to shift gears momentarily. In 1956, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went to Denver to attend a Women's Day program at New Hope Baptist Church. There, he heard a soprano named Anna Lee Williams perform a song, "If I Can Help Somebody." After Dr. King heard this song, he traveled home to Atlanta and told his mother that Miss Williams had them jumping out of the window with her beautiful rendition. The song certainly left a lasting impression on him. In February 1968, just 2 months before his assassination, Dr. King delivered his famous Drum Major Instinct sermon. In that sermon, he imagined his own funeral, and he said that he hoped he'd be remembered for serving others, not for fame or personal accomplishment. He ended that sermon by quoting 4 lines from If I Can Help Somebody. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or a song, if I can show somebody he's traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. Today, to perform If I Can Help Somebody, I welcome to the stage a woman who is not only a passionate champion of civil rights, but who is also blessed with a tremendous voice. She needs absolutely no introduction to her friends and colleagues in the Civil Rights Division and the Disability Rights section. But for everyone else, I give you Miss Dorothy Williams.
If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring back beauty to a world abroad, if I can spread love's message that the Master taught, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain.
That was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, Dorothy, for your inspiring voice, your inspiring words, your powerful message to us today. We who have the honor of working in the Civil Rights Division are honored to work day in and day out on the fundamental work of our democracy, to make our country more free, more open, more fair, more just, and more equal. It's a legacy that's integral to the work that we do, and so integral that Civil Rights Division professionals take it with them wherever they go after their time in the department comes to an end. It's because of this enduring legacy that I'm particularly excited to welcome back to the Department of Justice a face that is familiar to many people here, Secretary of Labor, R. Alexander Acosta. Secretary Acosta, from 2003 to 2005, served as the 15th confirmed Assistant Attorney General in the Civil Rights Division. He thereafter served a distinguished tenure as a United States Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. Secretary Acosta's tenure in the Civil Rights Division was marked by an incredible commitment to the robust enforcement of the nation's civil rights laws. But one aspect of his leadership in particular merits mention, and that's his outstanding leadership on fair housing issues. During his tenure, the department filed 58 fair housing cases and secured recoveries through settlements or litigated judgments in approximately 70 cases for a total of around $25 million in recovery to victims of lending and housing discrimination. But beyond the numbers, Secretary Acosta did much to advance the way the division thinks about and brings fair housing cases. This is a very fair housing savvy audience, so I imagine that most of you are aware of provisions of the Fair Housing Act that protect the rights of persons with disabilities. Among other things, these provisions require that certain multifamily housing be accessible to people with disabilities. And for years, the division found itself investing resources in litigating long and drawn-out cases against developers, engineers, and architects who could have solved the problem on the front end, who could have saved themselves a lot of time and a lot of money by building their buildings the right way in the first place. And Secretary Acosta saw this challenge as an opportunity. He saw it as an opportunity to help these developers and other defendants achieve compliance on the front end and save themselves hassle on the back end. So he maintained a robust enforcement program, but also engaged in public outreach and education to make sure that people understood the requirements of the Fair Housing Act. And I'm proud to say that we're continuing that effort today. Our staff continues to look for new and innovative ways to educate developers and others on their obligations and the requirements under the Fair Housing Act. Today, Secretary Acosta has taken his leadership to the Department of Labor, where he's doing a tremendous job on behalf of wage earners, job seekers, and retirees all across the country. And although he's no longer with us here in the division or in the department, he maintains his singular commitment to serving the public and doing the right thing that he learned here, I hope, in the Civil Rights Division. So please join me in welcoming the Secretary of Labor, Alexander Acosta.
John, thank you for the introduction, Assistant Attorney General Gore, and you know, I love hearing, for those that I see some familiar faces, for those that remember me, I love hearing the stats, because I very much believe it's important to have robust enforcement. General Sessions, thank you for your leadership, and I was particularly heartened to hear about your initiative on sexual harassment. Ralph, it was wonderful to see you. You know, when Dorothy, it was great to see you. It's great seeing you again. And as you were singing, the crowd was kind of going like that, and you know, you saw the sort of the head nods, and as and I saw Assistant Attorney General Boyd's head nodding with I think a trademark smile that hasn't changed in over a decade, and so it's great to see you. Friends, I recognize at least a few of you in the audience. I was thinking about how to celebrate and honor the Fair Housing Act, and it struck me that the best way of doing that is by honoring the men and the women that enforce that act. And honoring you is best done, I think, by honoring your work. And so we pulled some press releases back from 2004, a few years ago. And I just thought it's worth going over some of those. So in 2004, the department settled the largest accessible housing case at that time in history. The settlement impacted over 4,000 apartments in 34 housing complexes across 6 states. And the agreement established a $1.2 million fund to compensate disabled Americans who suffer discrimination due to inaccessible housing. That's called an impact case, and that's why you're here. But I think it's important to recognize that impact cannot be measured solely by size. And I say that because in a very different case, a settlement was established and a compensation fund of only $10,000. 1.2 million, 4,000 apartments, 34 housing complexes, 6 states, and then only 10,000. Yet in the second case, the impact may have even been greater. Why? Because the action was the first brought against an internet advertising website for discriminatory rental. Before that time, internet listings had never been held to that standard, but they were. And while they represented only a very small fraction of the market at that time, things have changed. And that case sent a powerful signal that the law applied as strictly on the internet as it did in traditional listings. And that started here in 2004. And so my point is that these cases and others impact the lives of individual Americans. One case was brought on behalf of an Air Force captain and his family. He wanted a home that would be comfortable for his wife and their 3 children. He found a home located close to Scott Air Force Base in Missouri, a base to which he had recently been transferred. But the landlord refused to rent to the captain simply because the captain had little children. And so the captain and his wife were ultimately awarded damages, and that's the right thing. In another case, the men and women of the Civil Rights Division secured convictions of 2 North Carolina men who conspired to drive an African-American family out of their home in what had previously been an all-white neighborhood. Almost immediately after moving into the neighborhood, the family was subjected to severe harassment. The FBI and local sheriff's offices worked together to investigate, identify the perpetrators, and work with the Department of Justice to bring criminal charges. And in some cases, even the local government was the subject of our actions. In a case that struck close to home, the District of Columbia was one of the parties. The local authorities refused to allow the Girls and Boys Club to operate group homes for children with disabilities. These were young men and women without families, but who still had people who cared deeply about them. And it was wrong for the city to block construction of good, safe homes for these children. Whether the threat to fair housing came from individual landlords, from neighbors, from the internet, or from public officials, what you did was right wrongs, and that matters. And so housing is fundamental to long-term success. Without a home, it's hard to have much more. Now, as Secretary of Labor, my job focuses on another fundamental element of success: family-sustaining jobs. Yet the answers to basic questions, I think, transcend whether it's housing or labor or others. And these questions are basic, asked by most Americans. How can I find a job? How can I find a home? How can I succeed? These are all interrelated questions. Individuals must have opportunity to access homes, jobs, and justice. And without an address, without a place to lay one's head, it's nearly impossible to do this. And so we at the Department of Labor are working with Secretary Carson, who's looking for innovative ways to offer opportunity in public housing so that individuals working in public housing can also access workforce education and workforce services so that job opportunities and housing are in close proximity. Americans who live in public housing must be aware of available pathways to good family-sustaining jobs. And so today, we came together and come together to honor the Fair Housing Act. And I know that all of you are steadfast in your commitment. The Fair Housing Act was created and endures because the American people spoke up. And they told their elected representatives that there are certain principles that we believe in. And that one of those principles is that the opportunity to rent or buy a home should not be dependent on the color of one's skin, the physical or emotional challenges that one may overcome, one's origin, one's faith, one's sex, or whether someone is raising a family. And this here is the temple where those ideals are protected. So I asked someone to walk over here and walk around the building and find some little sayings. I remember I'd go out to lunch and I'd see the little sayings on the outside of the building. And here's one that struck me. It comes from Daniel Webster, and it was delivered at the funeral of Justice Story. Justice is the greatest interest of man on earth. Wherever her temple stands, there's a foundation for social security, general happiness, and the improvement and progress of our race. Justice must have a temple. Justice must have a home. Because a home is the foundation where we build our lives. The men and women in this room built their lives in part by ensuring that their fellow Americans have access to justice. And you need to walk out of here today confident that that matters. Because that matters to the men and women out there who you've helped throughout your careers here, who you impact, whether directly through the cases that General Sessions cited or that I cited, or through those repercussions that spring forth from those cases. That little $10,000 case may have had more impact than the largest. This is a great calling because, as the oath that we took when we started in government states, our obligation is to preserve freedom and liberty by supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States and the laws that flow from it. And that is a great oath and a great calling. And so the celebration today is a celebration of your work. Thank you for what you do in General Sessions. Thank you for having those of us that worked here before, myself, General Boyd, been a while since you've been called General Boyd, and others back here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Acosta, for your thought-provoking remarks and your strong leadership, both here in the department and at the Department of Labor. We're drawing to a close of our event today, but I want to make one reminder. In the back, we have on display, courtesy of Archivist David Ferraro and his fantastic team at the National Archives, the original signed copy of the Fair Housing Act with President Johnson's signature on it. We thank the National Archives for allowing us to display this today, and I encourage everyone to go take a look on your way out. There are many people who helped us put on this event today, and the Civil Rights Division and throughout the Department of Justice. I thank all of you for your hard work and your dedication. I expect some of you to be taking the day off tomorrow. Finally, I'd like to thank all of our participants in today's program again, and please join me in recognizing them. Ms. Dorothy Williams, Secretary Acosta, Assistant Secretary Farias, who unfortunately had to leave early, Secretary Dr. Ben Carson, Acting Associate Attorney General Jesse Pinoccio, and the Attorney General of the United States, the Honorable Jeff Sessions. And thank you all for joining us today.
Alex, good to see you, man. Glad you made it. Good.